Shalom, welcome to our Erev Shabbat talk. Let's call it a talk. Today it's a little bit of a story, a little bit of Torah, a little bit of history. But we are in the final weeks after Tisha B'Av. We're ending the difficult month of Tisha B'Av in the Jewish calendar. We're looking forward to Rosh Hashanah, the month of Elul, the month that God is in the field, that God comes out of the psychic screens of the mind and into one-on-one relationship with people, the accessibility of having our prayers heard, having our Torah lifted up to heaven. It's a very special time. We're entering on Rosh Chodesh Elul. And yet I do recall that we have these famous haftorot, every Shabbat Torah reading, we have a haftorah of comforting. Since the destruction of the temple 2,000 or so years ago, we have experienced exile. And that includes the exile of the Jewish people from the land, the exile of the Jewish people from the Torah, the exile of understanding the Torah, the exile of our relationship to the secrets of Torah, the exile of the self from God. So exile is not a singular idea. It's happening at many layers. And each layer is important and it's part of a great whole. And the redemption, of course, is when all those exiles are solved and healed and repaired and restored, and all of our relationships return to perhaps return to where they've never been before, because it's going to get better than it ever has. And it really has. And you really feel that when you live in the land, you live in Eretz Israel, and you see the Jewish people growing and building and achieving things that they never have before. And it happens in all categories of human interaction and human endeavor. We see Eretz Israel is just growing and expanding. And it's part of the redemptive process. Okay, but the comfort's an interesting idea. In halacha, comfort is when we call it menachem avelim. It's when we go to comfort those who have suffered a loss, the people who are in mourning. And so people don't like mourning. Generally, they don't like to think about mourning because of what it implies. But mourning itself is a gift from Hashem. It is a gift because it is the comfort that we need to get back to who we really are and what we're here to do. Now, the haftorot of comfort have a pattern. And the pattern is usually like this, right? Some Jews do some bad things. They get attacked by the nations. They get redeemed by some special leader. And then the land has 40 years of rest. More or less, that's the pattern. That's the paradigm. And so God is allowing us to put ourselves into needing the salvation. In other words, we shouldn't need salvation, except I do things that I shouldn't do that create the context of needing to be saved, right? You don't walk on the edge of a building and then expect it's just like walking through the middle of the park. When you take chances with life, then life gets dangerous. And when we take chances with how we live, with our relationships, with our money, with sexuality, with governments, with people, with weapons, with violence, there's so many things that if we take chances with them, a car is a dangerous vehicle. In the wrong hands at the wrong time in the wrong place. But we all need a car, or at least most of us do. So what we understand is that salvation only comes because we need it. But the creation is designed to work perfectly as it is. And yet God gives us free choice so that we don't quite get it right every time. But there's this built-in mechanism of tshuva, this built-in mechanism of returning to our true selves, returning to the path of the Torah and the path of the sages, and that invokes God's mercy, and he sends us a special person that is going to redeem us from our oppressors, whatever and however they appear in our lives. Okay. But comfort oftentimes is connected with a death, with a loss. And I heard two stories recently that I thought I would like to share, because they both involve an experience that I had similarly years ago. And the stories have to deal with comfort as well. The one story was told by a friend of mine who experienced it firsthand to his friend. And it goes like this. A Jewish guy here in Eretz Israel, his wife got very sick. And she kept declining, and it looked like she wasn't going to make it. And so they sent a group of rabbis to Baba Elazar, the grandson of Baba Sali, a great Kabbalist from Beersheba. They went to him to ask for a blessing for this sick woman. And, if you ever done that, I have done that. And if you ever do that, you're standing around in the middle of the night waiting for a chance to see the rabbi for about 7 seconds, maybe 10. I don't know. It depends how much chutzpah you have. But they waited and they saw the rabbi, and my friend put down the name of the sick woman in front of the rabbi, and he looked at it and he just shook his head. He said, there's nothing I can do for her. But you will be comforted. You will have the comforting of Hashem. So he went home to the husband with this message from the Kabbalist, and, well, his wife didn't get better, and she passed away. And then the whole family was sitting together, and we're talking about a large family. We're talking about not just the husband and his children, but his brothers and sisters, and the deceased woman's brothers and sisters and parents, and all the children. It must have been 50 people sitting there. And the window of their apartment was open. And in the window flew a stork, a big bird. A stork has a wingspan about 2 meters, it can. And this giant bird flew into the living room and landed right on the grieving husband's shoulder. And it sat there. And everybody's just like in shock. A little bird flies in your living room and lands on your shoulder. It's kind of cool. But when it's a big bird, what's going on? Who sent this bird? How did this bird come here now? Does this bird have extrasensory perception to know that this man's shoulder that he landed on is mourning his lost wife? And so the bird sat there for a long time, and everybody was just stunned in silence. And then the bird lifted up and flew over to the dead woman's mother and landed on her shoulder. And then the bird lifted up again and went over to the father of the deceased and landed on his shoulder. And then the bird flew out the window. Now, what happened? Well, why is it a comfort to have a bird land on your shoulder when you're at a shiva? When you're sitting in mourning on the floor, or on these little low chairs they made, in our generation for the purpose. But of course, the comfort is that this very peculiar event took place to communicate something to the people who were sitting in mourning. And the comfort was that, now this is of course my own interpretation, but I've sat in mourning before for beloved people in my family. The comfort was, you're not alone. And I will, God being the I in the sentence, I will send to you something peculiar to communicate to you that you're not alone. That you're not sitting in suffering for no reason. That there is a bigger picture behind this picture. And the suffering that you're going through is not without purpose. It's not without meaning. And in the literature of Torah, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, the divine, what we call the immanent presence of God, not the transcendental God that's way out somewhere in the upper cosmos, the immanent presence of God here in the world that comes to do things. The Talmud tells us a lot of things that the divine presence does, to make shidduchim, to make gerim, to comfort people like we see, to bring people back from exile, all kinds of jobs the Shekhinah has in exile. But here it was a comforting. So there was a sense in the room that the presence of God was here, and we were comforted by that presence. Okay, next story. This happened, it's a true story. It happened in the 73 war. There was an outpost in the Golan, up in the northeastern region of Israel that faces Syria. The Syrians were coming down hard on the Israelis, and there was a small unit of soldiers with their commander was trying to hold their post. And there was a large group of Syrians, and their tanks were coming towards them. Now, I don't remember all the names of the people, but this is a fairly well-documented story that happened, that the commander had them set up machine guns every so far along a line, and then they only had a few soldiers. So what they did is they went from gun to gun to gun, firing the gun to make the Syrians think that there were a lot more enemy, the Syrian enemy, the Israelis, facing them. And that's what they did. So they were shooting off gun after gun in a long row. And still, several Israeli soldiers were killed in this event. During the whole thing, a dove flew down and alighted on the shoulder of the commanding officer. The entire event. That means the placing of the machine guns, the shooting of them, the realigning of them, the loading them, the whole thing. This bird sat on the shoulder. It was a dove. It wasn't a big pelican, but it sat on the shoulder of the soldier during the whole thing, of the commander. And everybody became aware of it. But in the middle of bullets flying, who cares, right? But once the fighting was over and the enemy left, for whatever reason, I imagine because they had enough, they started to clear out the dead bodies. And the bird stayed with him throughout the entire process. And at the end, when they're all kind of like coming together because the battle is over, the day is ended, they said, well, quick, someone get a camera and let's take a picture of our commander with the dove on his shoulder. The minute they said, let's take a picture, the dove flew away. Now that seems like a pretty strong divine intervention. But we see that they did normal military things to achieve a certain end, to hold the outpost. However, there was a blessing, there was a grace, there was a protection, a field of energy around the soldiers to accomplish what they did. And so they realized that once they thought of taking a picture of the dove, the story was over. The dove left, but they felt the presence again through this bird. Now, before I came to Israel, I had a dream that I was being followed by a flock of geese across the Atlantic Ocean on a boat. I was on a boat racing across the waves, and a flock of geese was flying over my head. And I said, and I knew I was going to Israel. Now, at that time, I hadn't bought a ticket. I hadn't decided I'm making Aliyah, I'm going to Israel. I just had this dream. And these birds, and I felt like this is an amazing dream. There's a lucid dreaming is when you're aware that you're dreaming while you're dreaming. A regular dream, you think it's your dream is reality. But a lucid dream is you're inside the dream. And I had that moment where I realized this is an amazing dream. These birds are flying with me across the ocean to Eretz Israel. So, and then I woke up and I remembered that in the 9th parak, the 9th chapter of Masechet Brachot, the first Masechet of the Talmud Bavli, there's a whole chapter on dreams. And I went in there and I opened it up and I found that it says that somebody who dreams of a goose, or in this case it was geese, plural, that if you dream of a goose, it's a sign that you're going to have wisdom. I said, okay, that's very nice. That feels good. Hopefully I'll have wisdom. At the time, I think I was 30 years old, 31 years old. And I didn't feel too wise. But it also told me that the comfort was that you're going to Israel to get your wisdom. That you're not going to stay in LA and live the LA life. You're going to go to Israel and find a different life to acquire wisdom. Now, whether I have or not, it's not my business. That's God's business, My business is to stay happy and keep the Torah. However, the idea still stands. You see that God uses creatures to communicate. Now, this is not a new idea. You can look in the Homer's Odyssey. You can look in the Iliad of Virgil. You can look at all the ancient classics, and they have animals, birds, different creatures being symbols of communication. But behind the communication of information, whatever the information is, whether you're going to go to Israel, you're going to get married, or you're going to be wealthy, or whatever it is, the idea is that God is with you, whether you know it or not. And whether you believe it or not, God is with you, because he has to be with you for you to stay in your body. For you to stay alive on this planet, you have to have a connection to God. Even if it's the tiniest, thinnest thread of divine light coming into a very dark soul, it's going to keep you in this world. And that's what death is just leaving this world and going somewhere else. So the comfort is that we're not alone, even if we think we're alone. And that even if we don't know what we need, there is something in the universe that knows exactly what we need, when we need it, where we're going to get it, how we're going to get it. And our job is to simply believe in that power. And when you believe in that power, you really believe. I don't know what's going to be tonight and tomorrow and the next day, but I believe it's going to be good. And I believe it's going to be the right thing to happen as long as I have to do what I have to do, which is to pray and to learn and to talk to my friends on Facebook and, do what we do. But it's a completely different thing when you know that you're not alone. Because you can let yourself be happy. You can let yourself be at ease. You can let yourself relax. Being in a relationship with God is not about tension, about awe all the time, fear all the time, anxiousness. Am I doing it right? No. God's doing it right. And my job is to be with that idea. And that puts me at ease. And that reduces the tension. That reduces the ADHD and and all the other multiple diagnoses. The doctors seem very adept in our generation at creating new diagnoses, because that's where you can sell more pills. But we don't need to sell pills, folks. We have the source of the healing right here inside us. And I was reading stories about miraculous healings earlier today. And it wasn't like this great Kabbalist was making blessings and doing white magic to bring about the healing. It was a simple rabbi that believed in the healing. See, because when you believe in the healing, you activate it. And if you need a healing, just believe in God that he can do anything, anytime, anywhere, any way he wants. And when you believe in that, he'll do the rest. Now, it doesn't mean I'm a fool and I don't talk to the doctor and I don't do what I need to do. But it does mean I don't put my faith in man. I put my faith in the creator of man. Because behind the scenes is a very, very big world. And that world is going to be revealed very soon. That's part of this redemption process that we're in. So I want to bless everyone with that faith and that ease and that grace to go with your faith and to not get into the calculations of yes or no or maybe or not, and if I do this and if I do that. Don't go there. Just have simple faith, like a child in the one that loves you. Have a great Shabbat. We'll see you next week on all the outlets. Shabbat Shalom.